Hi to everyone. Hopefully you're expecting open data. So I'm going to be talking to you today about how we are opening up data to drive an integrated energy transition. Now, for those of you that haven't come across us, our role is to regulate and influence oil and gas, carbon storage, and hydrogen industries. And at present, we've got three key priorities in doing that. Firstly, to accelerate the energy transition. Secondly, to reduce emissions. And whilst doing that, also ensure energy production and security for the country. Now, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the opportunities that we see for the integrated energy sector. We know that oil and gas production in the UK is in decline. Our projections show a continued fall through to 2050. If we can manage the energy transition, then the UK can be a shining example of how to build a clean energy superbasin. The North Sea has a variety of natural resources, ranging from up to 3.75 billion barrels of oil and gas, a 50 gigawatt target for offshore wind, and up to 78 gigatons of carbon storage potential. Now, I'm going to rely on you not to ask me questions about those three figures. They could change. They are estimates. And that's a dangerous thing to say with a data audience, isn't it? But the UK has the infrastructure. It's got key onshore terminals. It's got offshore clusters, and also 100 pipelines with real repurposing potential. We've got a world-class energy supply chain and world-class people that can link the different ways that the sector can make that transition possible. So at the NSTA, we believe that the way the transition will work is through the integration of different energy systems, and the way we do that is integration in its widest sense in terms of data. Now, you'd be pleased to know that's the energy-specific part over. I'm now going to talk about the actual data itself. So to give you a flavour of what our data is, we're talking about rocks and maps. So we hold very little personal data. The majority of our data is geospatial data and geological data. So what are some of the challenges we're facing? Now, these are not going to be unique to us, and I'm pretty sure I don't need to go through these in great detail. But in terms of a sector, we've got huge volumes of data. Those data are siloed across the sector and organisations. We've got inconsistencies across both the portals and platforms that access the data and the data itself. That starts to open up challenges around data ownership and how data can be used across the sector. And I won't go into the security and privacy things because I think everybody is on the same page on those. But I just wanted to give you a bit of a flavour on quality. So everyone has challenges about quality. What challenges do we have? So starting off again, the types of data we hold, rock and map data. So for those of you that don't have a geological or geospatial background, you can see on the screen a bit of rock data. So this is some seismic data that helps you to understand the subsurface. On the other side of the screen, you can quite obviously see a map. The map shows you all of the energy assets in the UK basin. So this is oil and gas assets, it's carbon storage assets, but it's also offshore wind farms. To be able to understand both the subsurface so you can work out what you need to do from an energy point of view, but also to spatially plan across the marine basin, you need high quality data of these two types. So just bear that in mind as I show you the next slide, rock and map data. As a regulator, we hold over a petabyte of data. The majority of that is seismic data in terms of volume, but there's also a lot of geospatial data. These are three pieces of data that were submitted to our National Data Repository. The first one, the observant of you will notice, is a European Football Championship team listing. I'm not sure for what year, but it's not going to help you understand the subsurface. It's neither rock nor map data. The second one was submitted as a PDF. The observant amongst you will notice it's actually a Word document, but it also contains pictures of flowers and seeds as someone was trying to decide what seeds to plant in their garden. Not going to help you on either of those. And these are some of the quality issues we're talking about. Now, the final picture is perhaps a more traditional quality issue. So this is a machine-readable PDF. You'll notice that you find it very difficult to read it as a human because someone has taken that document, they have scanned it multiple times, they've taken it out of a folder, they scanned it a few more times, and that's been submitted to us as a machine-readable PDF. Now, these are the kind of the quality issues that we are trying to solve to enable the breakdown of those silos and actually get the data moving is important, but if the quality that underlies it is this kind of quality, then we're going to have problems. Now, I should say not all of our data is like this, right? I've obviously pulled out the three which are the most interesting. But that was the challenge that we had in front of ourselves. So what are we going to do about it? A few years ago, we worked with Energy Systems Catapult to come up with a report to highlight a cohesive digital and data strategy across the offshore energy sector. So I've gone through some of the challenges, but the other challenge here is getting the people in the room that make the decisions in this area. So you can see a whole bunch of logos on this slide. These are the government organisations, industry representative bodies, and other interested parties in terms of getting that cohesive digital and data strategy in place. That report came out with three key strategic recommendations. Firstly, to unify data principles. Now, you'll notice we haven't gone for the hard thing. We're not unifying data standards here. What we're saying is we need to be working on the same basis in terms of the principles that we are living as organisations working in this sector. We need to be consistent. That's not to say standards aren't important, but if you are drilling an oil or gas well and you are putting an offshore platform in place for offshore wind, you don't collect the same types of data. Some of it will be the same, but it's not necessarily the same data attributes, the same data types. So actually, standards isn't a good starting place for us. It's more around those principles. The second area of delivering a common data toolkit. So in theory, once we've got that high quality data that we're happy with, how do we get that data from A to B? What are the data pipelines or data fabric that we need to enable people to access the data in a way that's interoperable but isn't duplicated across the piece? The third area was driving cross-sector digitalisation and perhaps the softer skills areas. So does the sector have the digital and data skills that it needs to be able to deliver? Does it comply with cybersecurity best practice? Those kind of elements. We need to make sure that everybody is aware of the importance. So the Offshore Energy Digital Strategy Group has been working for the last few years on those three groups of priorities. We issued about 6 months ago our data principles. And as I said, you can see the principles on the screen here. They are very high level. They're the bullet points there on the screen. They are not standards. They're not intended to dictate how you do your form and manner. But they are about getting people around the table to talk about the key priorities that we have as a sector and how we see those working going forward. So we talked for 2 years and we got these principles agreed. We now are moving into the delivery phase of that. What do we actually do with those principles? How do we make sure organisations are signed up to them? And when I'm talking organisations, I'm talking about government bodies, operators, licensees across the sector. The second area around common data toolkit, getting the data from A to B, is a big, chunky recommendation. You can see a whole load of nice, fancy buzzwords there. Should we have a data catalogue? Should we have one digital infrastructure and architecture that works across the network? What we're talking about here is actually what is the problem and the challenge we're trying to address. And that challenge is really the silo challenge. We've counted 13, 14, 15, we're still counting data portals and platforms in this space. Some people don't know of which ones exist, so that's our first challenge, making sure that government, academia, operators, licensees know where they can access the data before you even start to look at how they access that data. So that's our big challenge. We're holding an event at the end of this month to try and widen the understanding of the data portals that are available or in place. Cross-sector digitalisation then. I just wanted to pull out two key stats from this slide. So we did a survey a couple of years ago with industry on digital and data maturity. Data skills and digital skills was the bit that really struck out to me here. So firstly, 74%, so nearly 3/4 of the people interviewed said that the driver for digital was reducing cost. But only 26% said that their data strategy's purpose was to drive cost. So the top driver for use of data, 3/4, was decision-making. So data is going to be used for decision-making, but digital is going to be used to reduce cost. Now, you can't do one without the other. They are integrated. If you're seeing one as a cost reduction measure and one as a value adder, how do you align those two? So we've got some work there to close that gap. The other thing to draw out on this slide is that this is a STEM-based industry. Most of the people working in the industry have got either an engineering or a geology background. But the skills needed for digital and data, as seen by the offshore energy sector, only 2/3 feel that their organisations have the digital and data skills for current technology. That drops to 1/3 when you talk about emerging technologies. Now, we didn't particularly well define what emerging technologies would be, but we did the survey in 2023, so I'm assuming that most people answer that, probably in terms of AI or machine learning. So only 1/3 of a STEM-based industry feels that they've got the appropriate digital and data skills. That's concerning for me. So the challenge for us now is to work out how to improve that. But what's the big picture in terms of what we hope to achieve by doing these recommendations? Firstly, we want to make sure that data that's been collected through many years, particularly in oil and gas operations, can be used for other purposes, particularly for the energy transition. So as an example here, the UK government funded large amounts of seismic data, £40 million worth, in 2015, with one purpose at that point, to widen oil and gas exploration. What we're seeing now is that by making that data openly available, people are taking the data, they've reprocessed it, and they've enabled it to be used for an entirely different purpose, to be able to use that to site offshore wind farms. That, for us, is a very clear example of why opening up data for people to access is really adding value. Now, I showed this screenshot earlier before, but just to talk a bit about this is the geospatial data, so the map-based data. For us, ensuring that there's an integrated energy basin can only be done if policymakers and organisations understand how the marine basin can be used. Now, this data you can see here is only 3 organisations. It's the North Sea Transition Authority, so oil and gas and carbon storage. It's the Crown Estate and Crown Estate Scotland, who are, in their respective countries, the licensing authorities for offshore wind. So you can already see how busy that space is. We haven't yet included on here the fishing zones, the marine defence zones, and the other uses of the marine space. But we wouldn't be able to make this data available in this way for people to do spatial planning if the data wasn't open and we weren't collaborating on how we do that. So for me, this is a really very clear example of why making data openly available is going to accelerate the energy transition. You couldn't do that with just data from one of those 3 organisations. So that's it from me. Hopefully I've given you a bit of a flavour of the offshore energy system in the UK, but also how open data is going to enable us to accelerate the energy transition going forward. And with 13 minutes, I think I've probably got time for one question, if anybody has one. I was going to say you're going to let me off easily, but okay, go. Mm-hmm. Sure. It's not strictly confidential, is my answer. And you can challenge me on the panel. I'm pretty sure we'll have some different views on this on the panel. But from my point of view, we're talking about a commodity product, whether you're talking oil and gas or whether you're talking data in this sense. So for us, seismic isn't confidential. It has confidentiality periods, and those vary based on the type of seismic. They range from 2 years to 20, depending on how you've collected and under what license. But my argument is that data is not commercial, and I think that's really important in terms of the open data front.